The door didn't slam shut, it creaked open, and Aaron Rodgers realized he was standing on the wrong side of it. Because while everyone was watching Pittsburgh for clues about their future, Mike McCarthy stepped to the podium and quietly told the entire NFL exactly what he wanted. And it wasn't Aaron Rodgers. This matters because for weeks there was a belief inside league circles that Rodgers could extend his career in Pittsburgh, reunite with a familiar offensive mind, and write one final chapter that didn't end in frustration. But when McCarthy finally spoke, he didn't mention Rodgers. He didn't hint at experience. He didn't talk about legacy. He talked about movement, rhythm, timing, and athleticism. And just like that, the entire story shifted. Here's the truth nobody wanted to say out loud. Aaron Rodgers didn't lose the Steelers because of politics, money, or ego. He may have lost them because the game finally moved on. Mike McCarthy knows Aaron Rodgers better than almost anyone alive. They built a Super Bowl together. They spent years arguing over details only quarterbacks and head coaches understand. If anyone was going to tailor an offense around Rodgers again, it would have been McCarthy. Instead, he walked into Pittsburgh and described the opposite of what Rodgers is now. McCarthy stood there and said he believes in the West Coast offense. That part didn't shock anyone. But then he explained what that actually means to him in 2026. He said the offense has to be built to make the quarterback successful. He talked about rhythm, timing, spacing, extending plays, athleticism. And those words landed heavy because they weren't accidental. They were intentional. In today's NFL, coaches choose their quarterbacks before they ever say a name. They describe traits, movement, style, philosophy. And when McCarthy painted his picture, Aaron Rodgers wasn't in the frame. Rodgers is 42 years old. That's not an insult. That's just reality. He's also just over 2 years removed from an Achilles tear that permanently changed how he moves. Even before the injury, Rodgers wasn't a run-first quarterback. He survived on anticipation, arm talent, and elite football IQ. After the injury, mobility wasn't just reduced, it was minimized. The numbers don't lie, and they don't need exaggeration. In 2025, Rodgers rushed for 61 yards. That's not just low. That's a career low for any full season he's ever played. It tells a story on its own. He wasn't extending plays. He wasn't escaping pressure. He was surviving within the pocket, hoping protection held long enough for his arm to solve the problem. And through the air, the drop-off was impossible to ignore. 3,322 yards. 24 touchdowns. Those are career lows when you remove seasons cut short by injury. For most quarterbacks, those would be respectable numbers. For Aaron Rodgers, they're signals. Signals that the margin for error is gone. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Because Rodgers didn't suddenly forget how to play quarterback. What changed was the league around him. Defensive speed increased. Pass rushers got faster. Coverage disguises got smarter. And offensive systems began demanding quarterbacks who could do more than throw from a clean pocket. McCarthy knows this better than anyone. He's watched the league evolve from the inside. He's seen what wins now. And when he talked about athleticism, he wasn't taking a shot at Rodgers. He was acknowledging reality. Then came the moment that confirmed everything. McCarthy didn't stop at describing a prototype. He named someone. Will Howard, a second-year quarterback who didn't play a single snap as a rookie. A player most fans weren't even thinking about. And yet, McCarthy's voice changed when he talked about him. He said he was excited. He said Howard really came on at Ohio State. He said he was anxious to work with him. That's not coach speak. That's interest. That's investment. That's a head coach signaling where the organization's eyes are drifting. Think about how rare that is. New head coaches usually lean on veterans, especially ones with Super Bowl rings, especially ones they've won with before. But McCarthy didn't do that. He bypassed the obvious name and focused on the unknown one. That tells you everything about where Pittsburgh is mentally. This isn't about a one-year bridge. This isn't about nostalgia. This is about building something that fits where the league is going, not where it's been. And here's the part Steelers fans need to sit with. Pittsburgh doesn't rebuild loudly. They transition quietly. They let things happen behind closed doors, and by the time the public notices, the decision has already been made. Rodgers may have had a chance. That chance just expired in real time. Not because he failed. Not because he embarrassed himself. But because the Steelers hired a coach with a vision that no longer aligns with him. Mike McCarthy didn't reject Aaron Rodgers with words. He did it with philosophy. Now imagine being Rodgers and hearing that press conference. Imagine knowing the man who once defended you against the entire league just described a quarterback built for movement, rhythm, and extension. Imagine realizing that even familiarity isn't enough anymore, that's the harshest reality of professional football. No matter how great you were, no matter what you've done, the system always wins. And the Steelers? They're choosing system over star. Well, Howard represents something Rodgers can't anymore. He represents potential, adaptability, a body that hasn't been through 2 decades of NFL punishment. A quarterback who can be molded instead of managed. McCarthy doesn't want to adjust his offense around limitations. He wants to expand it around possibilities. This isn't an indictment of Rodgers' career. It's a reflection of its timing. Rodgers is a master craftsman in a league that now favors multi-tools. And while he can still win games, the question Pittsburgh asked themselves was simple. Does this help us in 3 years? Or does it just delay the inevitable? For a franchise built on stability, the answer matters. The most revealing part of all this isn't what McCarthy said. It's what he didn't say. He didn't mention experience. He didn't mention leadership. He didn't mention trusting a veteran. Those used to be the talking points whenever Rodgers' name came up. This time, they were absent. Silence can be louder than criticism, and now the NFL is watching. Because if Pittsburgh passes on Rodgers, it changes the entire quarterback market. It confirms that teams aren't afraid of moving on, even from legends. It confirms that age, injuries, and mobility are no longer negotiable traits. Rodgers still has value, but it may only exist in systems willing to compromise. Pittsburgh isn't one of them. This moment will be remembered not as a breakup, but as a realization. A realization that the version of Aaron Rodgers teams once built around is no longer the version standing under center. Mike McCarthy didn't close the door aggressively. He simply walked through a different one, and standing on the other side of that door is Will Howard, opportunity in his hands, and a franchise ready to bet on tomorrow instead of yesterday. Now here's the real question. Was Pittsburgh right to move forward, or did they just turn their back on the last safe option they had? Let me know in the comments. Is Mike McCarthy making the smart long-term call, or will the Steelers regret letting Aaron Rodgers slip away? And this is where the conversation around Aaron Rodgers gets even more complicated, because what's happening in Pittsburgh isn't just about one roster decision. It's about a league-wide shift that Rodgers is running into headfirst. For years, teams bent their philosophies to accommodate elite quarterbacks. They slowed the offense down. They simplified reads. They protected the pocket at all costs. But the modern NFL is asking quarterbacks to be part of the solution when the play breaks down, not just the executor when everything goes right. That's why McCarthy's words mattered so much. Rhythm, timing, spacing. Those concepts depend on movement. They depend on a quarterback who can reset a launch point, threaten the edge of a defense, and force linebackers to hesitate for half a second. That half second is the difference between a completion and a sack. And at this stage of Rodgers' career, that half second isn't guaranteed anymore. This isn't speculation. Defenses showed it on tape all throughout 2025. Pass rushers stopped worrying about contained lanes. They stopped hesitating on inside moves. They knew Rodgers wasn't escaping the pocket the way he once did. When a defense stops fearing your legs, the field shrinks. Windows close faster. And even a Hall of Fame arm can't fight physics forever. Pittsburgh saw that. McCarthy saw that. And instead of trying to patch over it, they chose to lean forward. Now let's talk about Will Howard, because this is where fans either lean in or roll their eyes. A second-year quarterback with 0 NFL snaps doesn't sound like the answer for a franchise that expects to compete. But that's exactly why McCarthy's excitement matters. He's not reacting to production. He's reacting to traits. Howard's growth at Ohio State wasn't about stats. It was about command, about comfort in chaos, about the ability to move within structure and outside of it without panicking. Those are the things you can't teach a 42-year-old quarterback coming off a major injury. But you can mold them in a young one. McCarthy isn't promising anything. He's planting a flag. He's saying this offense will be built around mobility and adaptability from day one. And that alone tells you Rodgers was never going to be more than a short-term thought experiment in Pittsburgh. Think about how different this is from how teams used to chase quarterbacks. 10 years ago, Rodgers would have been the unquestioned answer. Even at 42. Even post-injury. His resume alone would have bought him patience. Today, resumes don't override fit. Fit overrides everything. That's the cold reality Rodgers is facing. He's no longer being evaluated on what he was. He's being evaluated on what he can do next. And for Pittsburgh, next means building an offense that doesn't need to be protected from itself. The irony here is that McCarthy helped create the version of Rodgers the league once feared. He designed systems that maximized his strengths and minimized his weaknesses. But the league learned. Defenses adapted. And now even McCarthy knows that version of football has an expiration date. This doesn't mean Rodgers can't play. It means he needs the right environment. One willing to slow things down. One willing to prioritize experience over evolution. Pittsburgh clearly isn't that place. And make no mistake, this decision will define McCarthy's tenure. If Will Howard develops, McCarthy looks visionary. If he struggles, fans will ask why the Steelers didn't take the safe route. That's the gamble. But McCarthy didn't come back to coach scared. He came back with conviction. Rodgers, meanwhile, is at a crossroads. Every passing offseason narrows the list of teams willing to redesign their offense around him. That list used to be long. Now it's short. And it's shrinking. What makes this moment so striking is how quietly it happened. No leaks. No drama. No public rejection. Just a press conference where a head coach described his ideal quarterback and accidentally told the truth. This is how eras end in the NFL. Not with announcements. With adjustments, Pittsburgh adjusted. Rodgers didn't fit. And the league took notice. Because if the Steelers are willing to move forward without him, who else will be?